Good evening and welcome to this meeting of Troy City Council for Monday, December 20th, 7 p.m. My name is William Utz, President of Council. I have the honor of doing the invocation and the Pledge of Allegiance tonight. Please stand.
What's the deal, William?
Do you want to do it?
Yes.
Oh, well, I will gladly go to Mr. Rosa.
That was the schedule.
Attend rehearsals.
That's right. Well, he tells me. Okay. Dear Lord, at this time of Christmas season, we come together to thank you for the many ways in which you have blessed our community. In gratitude, we commend to you, Father, the many years of service rendered to the city by Mr. Twillier and Mr. Swayzer. Grant us and the new members wisdom and discernment for the times ahead. Bless each and every one of our citizens this holiday as we prepare to share this special time with family and friends. All these things we pray in your name. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Rozelle. You've done a much better job than I could have ever thought of doing, so thank you. Mrs. Knight, will you please take the roll this evening?
Mr. Swayzer.
Here.
Mr. Phillips.
Here.
Mr. Sievert.
Here.
Mr. Twist.
Here.
Mr. Rozelle.
Here.
Mr. Terwilliger.
Here.
Mr. Schilling.
Present.
Mrs. Snee. Mr. Whidden.
Move to excuse Mrs. Snee.
Second.
It's been moved to excuse Mrs. Snee by Mr. Sievert, seconded by Mr. Phillips. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Phillips.
Yes.
Mr. Sievert.
Yes.
Mr. Twist.
Yes.
Mr. Rozelle.
Yes.
Mr. Terwilliger.
Yes.
Mr. Schilling.
Yes.
Mr. Swayzer.
Yes.
Motion to excuse.
Mrs. Snee is excused.
Motion to excuse Mr. Whidden.
Second.
It's been moved to excuse Mr. Whidden by Mr. Phillips, seconded by Mr. Schilling. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Sievert.
Yes.
Mr. Twist.
Yes.
Mr. Rozelle.
Yes.
Mr. Terwilliger.
Yes.
Mr. Schilling.
Yes.
Mr. Swayzer.
Yes.
Mr. Phillips.
Yes.
Mr. Whidden is excused.
Mrs. Knight, will you please read a summary of the minutes of the December 6, 2021 meeting of Troy City Council?
Minutes of Council, December 6, 2021. Committee reports. Buildings and Utilities Committee recommended legislation be prepared authorizing bidding and contracting for the North Madison Street Lift Station Rehabilitation Project. Streets and Sidewalks Committee recommended legislation be prepared authorizing bidding and contracting for West Main Street Improvement Phase 1 traffic signal poles. Resolution number R62, 2021. Bidding and contracting North Madison Street Lift Station Project, first reading and adopted. Resolution R63, contracting for the West Main Street traffic poles, was given first reading and was adopted. Resolution number R64, 2021. The funding and agreement with the Troy Rec was given first reading and adopted. Resolution R65, 2021. Funding for Troy Main Street for 2022, first reading and adopted. Resolution number R66, 2021. Funding to Troy Development Council for 2022, first reading and adopted. Ordinance number 065, 2021, appropriating funds for 2022, first reading and adopted. Ordinance number 066, 2021, salaries and wages of certain employees, was given first reading and adopted. Ordinance number 067, 2021, salaries and wages of certain employees, was given first reading and adopted. Ordinance number 068, 2021, salaries and wages of certain employees, given first reading and adopted. Ordinance number 069, 2021, amending Chapter 141 regarding some benefit provisions, was given first reading and was adopted. Ordinance number 070, 2021, reappropriation of funds for 2021, was given first reading and was adopted. Ordinance number 071, 2021, the final application for an annexation of 12.524 acres, was given first reading and adopted. A presentation was made on behalf of Troy Main Street. Following comments, council adjourned 7:37 p.m.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. House Council wishes to dispose of the minutes this evening.
Move to adopt.
Second.
It's been moved to adopt the minutes by Mr. Rozelle, seconded by Mr. Schilling. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Twist.
Yes.
Mr. Rozelle.
Yes.
Mr. Terwilliger.
Yes.
Mr. Schilling.
Yes.
Mr. Swayzer.
Yes.
Mr. Phillips.
Yes.
Mr. Sievert.
Yes.
Minutes are approved.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. Move on to committee reports. We'll begin with the Community and Economic Development Committee, and standing in for Mrs. Snee, Mr. Rozell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This committee met on December 13th, 2021 to consider the recommendation of the Troy Planning Commission that the amended subdivision regulations be approved. These regulations were last updated in 2009. The proposed revisions clarify the regulations to make them more user-friendly by developers in working with staff. It is the recommendation of this committee that the recommendation of the Troy Planning Commission is supported and that the legislation to be prepared to approve the amended subdivision regulations. This is respectfully submitted by William Twist, William Rozell, and Lynn Snee as chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Rozell. Do council members have any comments or questions on the item? Mr. Schilling.
Yes. Mr. Titterington, who wrote the subdivision ordinance as far as all the 45 or 50 pages of the document?
Who wrote it originally?
Or how did we get a hold of it?
That goes back to 2006, 7, 5, 05.
Okay.
What we did was, so it's been in existence in our code for decades, maybe.
Okay.
The revisions that were done to reorganize it and clarify some things were done by the engineering and development staff.
Okay. And then the entire document, is that considered the revision, or is that the entire code, and within that document there were certain revisions done to it?
Correct.
Okay. I do have a question on that, and I would like to, let me pull it up here. If you hold on, bear with me. Okay, I want to go to page 2 of the ordinance and looking at section 1111-01, I guess sentence E. And in that it says, we're talking about technically feasible and economically reasonable standards to help achieve a higher level of subdivision design and construction in order to prevent degradation of natural resources and promote and maintain the public health, safety, comfort. And the question I have is on morals. Are we interested in regulating the morals of the residents of the subdivisions?
I don't have that particular section, but I believe that was in the code always. It's not something that we revised or added.
Again, are we interested as a city in regulating the morals of a subdivision?
I don't know if that comes out of any kind of judgments that in the past perhaps was part of an opinion. Again, I don't know why we did that and what the exact meaning of the word morals is in that context.
Well, the dictionary definition is considering morals as concerned with the principle of right and wrong behavior and goodness or badness of human character. So how are we defining morals in that? How does the city plan to define morals in this particular section?
Perhaps the law director can elaborate on that.
Mr. Schilling, I think that's more of an aspirational type. Typically, in legislation like this, the legislation will set forth purposes why the city feels a need to regulate the development of subdivisions. And oftentimes you'll find some of the legislation, for instance, it'll say this is to further the health, safety, and welfare of the city. It's another nebulous concept as far as morals. So it's just stating why the city is doing that. I'm not aware of any criteria contained in there that addresses morals. So I don't think city staff or ultimately the city council makes these, or the planning commission makes these decisions I don't see anything within the contents which talk about your definition of morals from the dictionary.
Okay, I would like to make a motion
Now's not the time for that.
not to make, okay,
When we get
We'll
to
get to
the
that,
item,
okay.
we'll undertake those items at that appropriate time.
okay, thank you.
Are there any other comments or questions on this item? We will move on to the Finance Committee, and for the last time, his report to council, our intimidable Finance Chair, Mr. Schweizer.
Thank you. We have one report. This committee met on December 13th, 2021 to consider the expansion project agreement application filed by ConAgra Foods Packaged Foods LLC for incentives under the Employee Creation Incentive Program, ECIP. The expansion project will create 100 new jobs with a new payroll of $4 million. The company estimated payroll should generate income tax of approximately $74,000 annually, resulting in an annual rebate of approximately $18,300 for 6 years. This is a net positive for the city. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared to approve the expansion project agreement application of the Employee Creation Incentive Program filed by ConAgra Foods Packaged Foods LLC, so that the application can be approved without delay. The company may move forward with the project. This committee supports emergency legislation. And this is submitted by Mr. Phillips, Mr. Seaver, and myself as chair. And I thought lime sludge lagoons were difficult.
Are there any comments or questions on this item? We move on to a plethora of oral reports this evening, and we'll begin with the Personnel Committee. Mr. Twist.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have 5, so think about it there. So I'll just go through each one, and then we can vote on those appointments for each group. So number 1, the Council President Letts has requested council approval of the following to the Income Tax Board of Review. Reappointment of Edward Westmeyer for a new 2-year term that will end December 31st, 2023. Appointment of Justin A. Kobe to fill the unexpired term of the late Kent Kazmaier through December 31st, 2022. So I move that council approve the reappointment of Ed Westmeyer and the appointment of Justin Kobe to the Income Tax Board of Review as recommended.
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Twist, seconded by Mr. Phillips for the appointments. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Rozell?
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Motion is approved.
All right, moving on to number 2. Mayor Oda has requested council approval of the reappointment of Joseph Graves to a new term to the Economic Development Revolving Loan Fund Loan Review Committee. It's a lot of loan reviews there. For a term ending December 31st, 2025. So I move that council approve the reappointment of Joseph Graves to the Economic Development Revolving Loan Fund Review Committee as requested.
Second.
It has been moved by Mr. Twist for the appointment, seconded by Mr. Rozell. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Twilliger?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Rozell?
Yes.
Motion is approved.
All right, number 3, Mayor Oda has requested council approval of the reappointment of the following to new 1-year terms on the Community Improvement Committee for terms ending December 31st, 2022. William E. Lukens, Bradley Bixley, Joseph Graves, Edward Westmeyer, Kathy Vukovic, and Gary Fisher. So I move the council approve the reappointment of William E. Lukens, Bradley Bixler, Joseph Graves, Edward Westmeyer, Kathy Vukovic, and Gary Fisher to the Community Improvement Corporation as requested.
Second.
There's been a motion by Mr. Twist for the appointments, second by Mr. Schweizer. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Rozell?
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger?
Yes.
Motion is approved.
All right, number 4, Mayor Oda has requested council approval of the reappointment of Martha A. Baker and Anthony Smith to new 5-year terms on the Board of Zoning Appeals for terms ending December 31st, 2026. I move that council approve the reappointment of Martha A. Baker and Anthony Smith to the Board of Zoning Appeals as requested.
Second.
It has been moved for the appointments by Mr. Twist, seconded by Mr. Schweizer. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Schweizer?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Siebert?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Rozell?
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Motion is approved.
Number 5, Mayor Odez requested council approval of the reappointment of Kane Feltner to a new 3-year appointment on the Human Relations Commission for a term ending December 31st, 2024. I move that council approve the reappointment of Kane Feltner to the Human Relations Commission as requested.
Second.
We have a motion for the reappointment by Mr. Twist, seconded by Mr. Schweizer. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Siebert?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Rozell?
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Schweizer?
Yes.
Motion is approved.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. We have a liquor permit request for the Law and Ordinance Committee.
We do. Mr. President, the Ohio Division of Liquor Control has transmitted the notice of a new D2 permit for Bob Evans Restaurants, LLC, 1749 West Main Street. A D2 permit is defined as wine and mixed beverages for on-premises consumption or in original sealed containers for carryout only until 1 a.m. According to the state website, there are 2 D2 permits available and 5 applications are on file. The police department has not recommended an objection or hearing request be filed, so I am hereby notifying council of the same.
Thank you, Mr. Siebert. Not sure if beer tastes good with biscuits and gravy, but I guess we're about ready to find out. Moving on to citizen comments for items on the agenda. We have 3 ordinances for discussion tonight. If you wish to address council on any of the 3 ordinances, you're invited to come up to the podium, give your name and address, take 2 minutes. Seeing none, we have no resolutions this evening. We'll move directly into ordinances. We'll ask Mrs. Knight to read ordinance 072, 2021.
Ordinance number 072, 2021, an ordinance approving the expansion project agreement filed by ConAgra Foods Packaged Foods, LLC, for the Employee Creation Incentive Program in the city of Troy, Ohio, and declaring an emergency. This was reported on this evening. This is the first reading.
Move to suspend.
Second.
It's been moved to suspend the 3-reading rule by Mr. Schweizer, seconded by Mr. Rozell. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Siebert?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Rozell?
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Schweizer?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Move to adopt.
Second.
The 3-reading rule has been suspended. It's been moved to adopt the ordinance by Mr. Schweizer, seconded by Mr. Siebert. Are there any final comments or questions? Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Rozell?
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Schweizer?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Siebert?
Yes.
Ordinance is adopted.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. Mrs. Knight, will you please read the next ordinance, ordinance 073, 2021.
Ordinance number 073, 2021, an ordinance repealing Title III, Part 11, subdivision regulations of the codified ordinances of the city of Troy, Ohio, and enacting new Title III, Part 11, subdivision regulations of the codified ordinances of the city of Troy, Ohio. These subdivision regulations have been recommended by the Troy Planning Commission. First reading.
Motion to amend.
Let's put it on the table first, and then we'll
Okay.
entertain a motion to amend. So, can I have a motion to approve the ordinance?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Second.
Or, I'm sorry,
No,
table.
suspend.
Suspend the rules,
Suspend.
suspend the rules, I'm sorry.
Okay, so
Suspend the
Motion to
rules
suspend.
first. We have a motion to suspend by Mr. Rozell, and then seconded by Mr. Phillips.
Yes.
Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Rozell?
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
No.
Mr. Schweizer?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Siebert?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Move to adopt.
Rules are, the motion,
You need 7 to
the motion
suspend.
to suspend the rules has failed for a lack of a supermajority. So therefore, we cannot take any action on this at this time. Am I correct?
You can go to a second
They
reading.
can go to the second reading.
Can we make a motion to amend?
I do not believe we can. Can we make a motion to
Yeah,
amend?
you can.
We can make, okay.
It cannot be,
We cannot act on that amendment.
It'll go on to second.
It'll go on to a second reading.
if it's amended.
Do you wish to amend the ordinance?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling moves to amend the ordinance. Would you like to explain in 30 seconds your amendment? Or a minute?
Yes. I'd like to make a motion to delete or take out the word morals from section 1111-1-.0, section E. I don't think it's the city's business to
Okay.
mention the morals. I mean, we spent enough time this year talking about residents' behavior, and I don't think we need to do that in the future on this particular item.
Okay.
Chair, what is the section you're referring to, 1111.01?
01, and it's E,
Subsection.
subsection E.
You want it?
I have.
He's got it.
A motion is on the table. Is there support? There is no support for the amendment. The item will go to a second reading in our next meeting. Moving on. Mrs. Knight, will you please read ordinance 074, 2021?
Ordinance number 074, 2021, an ordinance establishing a Robinson Reserve at Duke Park Fund and declaring an emergency. This is needed by the city auditor for the tracking of the revenues and expenses associated with the reserve, and council must first approve a new fund, and then it's submitted to the state for approval. First reading.
Move to suspend.
Second.
There's a motion to suspend the three reading rule on the ordinance from Mr. Rozell, seconded by Mr. Seaver. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Twilliger.
Yes.
Mr. Schilling.
Yes.
Mr. Swazer.
Yes.
Mr. Phillips.
Yes.
Mr. Sievert.
Yes.
Mr. Twist.
Yes.
Mr. Rozell.
Yes.
The auditor would like me to move to adopt this motion, since he sits right beside me and has asked me to do that.
We'll move to adopt the ordinance by Mr. Sievert, seconded by Mr. Twist.
Approved by Mr. Freeman.
Approved by Mr. Figgy.
Are there any final comments or questions on this item? Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Schilling.
Yes.
Mr. Swazer.
Yes.
Mr. Phillips.
Yes.
Mr. Sievert.
Yes.
Mr. Twist.
Yes.
Mr. Rozell.
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger.
Yes.
Ordinance is adopted.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. Moving on to communications and announcements. Are there any tonight, Mrs. Knight?
No, sir.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. Moving on to comments of officials. Mayor Oda.
Just wishing everybody a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
All right, thank you. Director of Public Service and Safety, Mr. Titterington.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a reminder that City Hall is closed on the 23rd, 24th, and 31st for the holidays because they do not fall on during the week. Christmas and New Year's, trash and recycling will be on schedule. In advance of the presentation, I would like to thank Mr. Swazer and Mr. Twilliger for your many years of service. It's been enjoyable, and I appreciate everything that you've done. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Titterington. Moving on to Director of Law, Mr. Kerber.
I would just echo the mayor's sentiment of Merry Christmas, as well as Patrick's regarding Mr. Swazer and Mr. Twilliger's service. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kerber. Moving on to City Auditor, Mr. Friggy.
Thank you, Mr. President. I echo the same sentiments from the previous two. Thank you for your service, fellows.
All right. Moving on to council members. Do council members have any comments tonight? Mr. Phillips.
Thank you, sir. Merry Christmas all our residents of the city of Troy, and thank you for your patience over the weekend with traffic and all that other stuff that goes on with this time of year, but also the friendships that have been cemented with our time on council with John and John, both. I superseded Mr. Terwilliger as the girls' golf coach at the high school, and I followed him here also. So that was a fun thing, and he's a sound voice of reason and maturity, and we're going to miss that. And Mr. Swayzer, you're the veteran guy here, and I'm replacing you in that position. And our friendship over the years means a lot to me, and your wisdom and our discussions over time about whatever came up at the moment are just outstanding, and we'll miss those particularly here, and I will personally, so thank you.
Thank you.
Friend to friend.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Any other council members have any comments this evening?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Schweizer.
I do. First, I want to thank everybody that I've had the opportunity and pleasure to serve with. Mrs. Knight, I don't know how you keep 10 bowling balls going uphill at the same time, but you managed to do it like nobody I've ever seen. Mr. Titterington, it's been a pleasure. And really, I would say there are, never mind.
Bite your tongue.
And to all the citizens out there, you know, sometimes we look at the community that we live in and we think, oh, this could be better, or oh, this could be better. You've got a lot of everything right here. We don't have Pebble Beach here, but we have a really good golf course. We don't have Wimbledon here, but we have really good tennis courts. We have a great park system. We have 20 some odd parks. We have 15 or 20 baseball diamonds within the city that everybody can get to. And for all of that, we pay less than, we're in the bottom third as far as taxes and fees in southwestern Ohio. And if that's not enough, when you consider that when you live in Troy, you're 2 hours from Indianapolis, you are an hour from Columbus, you're 20 minutes from Dayton, you're 3 hours from Lexington, you're 3 hours from Louisville, Cleveland is 3.5 hours away, and if you want to go to Chicago, Chicago is only about 5.5 hours away if you get all the lights. It's just a great community. If you sit back and you look at it, we truly do have the best of all worlds right here. So it's been a pleasure to serve, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Schweizer.
Hi, Jim.
If you wish, Mr. Terwilliger, the floor is yours.
I really appreciate, this was kind of an experiment in retirement for me. I'm glad that I did it. It has been everything and nothing but rewarding for myself. I want to thank my fellow council persons. Trying to be generically correct there. Frequently, over the last couple weeks, people have said, oh, count down, you only got so many days left, and you're probably thrilled to death to be leaving council. And that is not the case. I respect everybody on this council. I respect the administration from all that we deal with. They deal with a whole lot more. The citizens of Troy, you do get periodic conversations and phone calls, but all of those are because people are expressing a genuine interest and a concern. There has not been any of this burn your house, move out of town. It has been very positive as far as I'm concerned. I need to thank my wife. She let me tolerate this experiment. Sue Knight, as John mentioned earlier, it's a strange occurrence that a person can be as well organized in as many different directions as Sue has the ability to do. Patrick, I appreciate what you have done in regards to keeping someone who is apolitical kind of informed from a political standpoint. He keeps you as informed as you need to be. Mayor Robin, we started as parents back in the not junior, but it was high school basketball, excuse me, was the one. We were on a board there and kind of have worked our way to her success and my sitting here in the corner. John, not much, but I appreciate John's kind of gotten me into a couple other little messes. He got me involved with our YMCA board and the trustees and directors. And he is a very involved person in multiple communities, and he needs to be commended on that. Grant, very quiet, but there and very legit in everything that he does. Who am I forgetting? The two people who have directed my little venture here on City Council in Mrs. Baker and Mr. Lutz. You've done a great job informing us, assisting council persons in preparation going into the meetings, and that's to be commended on their part. So I thank you for the opportunity to serve. I've enjoyed it. I would recommend it to anybody who wants to give her a shot. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Terwilliger. Any other council members have any comments this evening? Seeing none, are there any staff members that have any comments this evening? Moving on, we move on to residents' comments. If you wish to address council on any topic, please come to the podium, give your name and address, and take as much time as you wish to consume this evening.
Hello, name is Doug Jackson. Address is 219 South Ridge Avenue, Troy, Ohio. Not going to be burning any houses or moving out, as it was commented earlier, but just wanted to share some things as a Ridge Avenue resident. We are happy that the Main Street project is happening. I think it's going to be a tremendous entrance into our city. And with progress, there comes a price as well. Ridge Avenue has been known by most residents in Troy as a street that by name they know what it's characterized as: historic, charming, and tree-lined. Recently, the trees have been removed on the eastern side between Main and McKeag as part of that progress. Again, we understand progress. We didn't chain ourselves to the trees. We're not the Lorax here speaking to save everything that grows. We understand that progress comes with a price. I met with city staff. It was a fantastic meeting, and I think that council, you get to work with staff. You know the tremendous staff that we have. They were able to provide a lot of insight into what's going on, answer some questions, and help. So I come tonight just to ask council to continue to advocate for what we have advocated for with city staff, just so that you're aware of the concerns that exist by the residents who are impacted by that, not just the residents of the street itself, but the residents of Troy. We have people that come onto our street to take walks, that drive from other neighborhoods and park there simply for the scenic beauty of it. We have runners that come by. We have people that choose driving routes to go down Ridge if they're cutting through the town because of the beauty of Ridge Avenue. So we just want to advocate that the city be aware of the concerns and do what we can as a city to make the situation as good as possible. We realize that some things that we would like to see are just not possible. We know that there is a right-of-way where those trees grew. We know that there are utility companies that have their own legal abilities to do things. So again, we're not asking for something that is what we believe outside of a scope, just advocating for what we have left to do what we can with Ridge Avenue. So we know that the utility lines that are scheduled to come in is the next phase. So the trees have been taken down, utility lines, major power lines, high voltage lines will be coming through. Obviously, that'll have another impact on Ridge Avenue. Again, what we can and can't do is very well understood. So really there's just two goals. One, that the action items I shared with staff who took diligent notes and hope to be able to accomplish as much as possible, I'd like to share with City Council. So that is continue ordinances and plans for the city come up. They can be taken into consideration. And then just your ongoing advocacy for the residents of Ridge as well as the residents across our entire community. But when I met with staff, there were a few things that we talked about. That is, with the poles that are coming in, there will be new utility poles. Our request is to have the fewest number of poles as possible. Again, utility companies have a major role in that decision, and I'm sure that there are requirements that they have to meet within. I also know that city and working with utility companies has some influence. We can ask for things, we can try to make it the best way possible, because I doubt that the utility company is really thinking about the residents of Troy. They're thinking about their power lines and power poles. So the fewest number of utility poles, that these poles be placed in the existing locations or existing pole locations versus new locations. Again, we don't know if that is possible, but Jill has taken notes and is willing to look into that with the utility company. One thing that we may be able to do in conjunction with the utility company would be to look at what style of pole is used. We do know that there's more than one style, but with this type of a line coming through, don't know what the style options are. But because Ridge Avenue is a historic and charming street, let's get poles that do the best at keeping Ridge Avenue looking historic and charming. The wooden poles are not very appealing as a landscape. So if there is something that we would do, I would even recommend that we invest as a city into maintaining or improving what we have as a possibility there. And then finally, just the communication of it, that we continue to communicate with all residents who can be impacted by that, not just a resident who has a tree removed from their property, because as a resident who didn't have a tree removed from our property, weren't aware that it was happening because of that, and just a communication piece, and the staff took great notes on that. We were significantly impacted by the entirety of all the trees that were taken down. So just communication, and I think that there's great opportunities for that continued communication. So just coming, again, with making it known that those are the requests, that I don't speak for all the residents around that street, I'm sure. I've been contacted by many. They know that they're here. Some have joined me tonight in the back of the room. Again, the staff are great at listening to those and taking notes, but advocacy so that council can be on the same page as the residents of that area that were impacted, and just so that you know what those asks were by us. So thank you for what you do to protect our city, and I hope that Ridge Avenue comes back better than it was before.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Are there any other residents that wish to address council this evening?
Bradley Barron, 105 Crestwood. Good evening, Mr. Lutz and members of council. I just want to take this opportunity to say thank you to all of you for the work that you have done in this last year. With the pandemic and all the stuff that's been going on, your work has not been easy, I'm sure. I only see what goes on this side of the dais. I don't see what goes on up there. So I know you guys have a lot of work that you do. I don't know if y'all know this, but I'm a bit of an Anglophile, meaning I like British things. And in the United Kingdom, there is a term that is used in Parliament for the longest serving member, and they are called the Father of the House. And I'm wondering, now, have you passed that title to Mr. Phillips yet, Mr. Schweizer?
Not till January 1.
But I just want to say to you and Mr. Twitter, I want to wish you both the best of luck in your endeavors. And I hope you're not a stranger. I mean, we already have a former president of council on a committee, so I don't see why, on a board, so I'll hope to see one of you two on a board. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barron. Any other residents wish to address council this evening? This time, we'd like to have a special presentation. If we could have the mayor come forward to the podium along with Mr. Schweizer and Mr. Terwilliger.
Get the tar and feather ready.
To the podium.
Get your big name tag and everything.
This is not very enjoyable for me because I have enjoyed working with both of you a lot. And hate to see you go. You've been on council for 13 years? 14. And I've been privileged to serve with you all of my time on council. And we're going to miss you. John, you've been on council for 5 years. And like you said, we've consideration to be given to the different issues and helping the residents understand, taking questions and helping find answers. You're going to be missed. John, this is still wrapped in plastic, so no need to say anything. John, thank you.
And on behalf of council, it has been a tradition for a number of years to give you your nameplate. And I think actually for Mr. Terwilliger, this is your second nameplate. For a couple of years, you were a councilman at large, and then decided to be a ward councilman. I think most residents of a certain age, mainly myself, this guy taught you for a number of years the wonders of PE and health, if I remember correctly. So this guy pretty much taught you the birds and the bees. So take that for what it's worth.
He was around at the original.
Mr. Terwilliger.
He knew Adam and Eve.
has always been
Adam and Eve and John.
Did you fail him? Did you fail him?
No. Thank you, Mr. Terwilliger. And Mr. Schweizer, the Schweizer family has been in town for a number of years. We all know Corey, who worked for the chamber for a number of years. And Mr. Schweizer himself has been on council for a long time. Went to school with your son Eric, who I believe was a Marine. Army. Served in the Army, served our country for a number of years. I believe he's down in Georgia. Yeah, has a wonderful family. So, thank you very much, Mr. Schweizer. You're very welcome.
Thank you.
I don't know if I can do it from here, but this concludes our meeting. We stand adjourned. Our next meeting will be January 3rd, I believe. And we will have a swearing-in ceremony for our new members on December 30th. Final time still being ironed out on that. Thank you for attending. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.